the new numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics showing that U.S. inflation jumped to 3.8% in April. It is outpacing wage growth, bringing back some, I think, bad memories for a lot of us in that post-pandemic era. Obviously, this is your area of expertise. Is this something you were expecting to see?
Um, you don't have to take too many economics classes to realize that if you raise tariffs and then start a war in the Middle East, which is the primary supplier of energy to the world and energy sold in world markets, it doesn't take a lot to realize that raises price pressures. So, everyone's been talking about it for a couple of years. I want to point to the silver lining here, which is what we're focusing on here when you say 3.8% inflation is the headline inflation number, which includes the price of energy. That headline is a very important answer to a very important question, which is what's happening to my cost of living. If you're thinking about instead, what does the future of inflation look like? We tend to think that that's better described by looking at core inflation, which is quite a lot lower. Core inflation strips out food and energy. The reason it does that is food prices go up and down with things like droughts. Energy prices go up and down with things like wars in the Middle East. And they don't necessarily reflect the underlying inflationary momentum of the economy. And so the bad news right now is that the cost of living has gone up. The good news is for these somewhat idiosyncratic reasons that have not yet become embedded into an inflationary psychology or an inflationary process.
So because we've seen this spike, what really accounts for this? Obviously, we have the war in Iran. We do still have tariffs on the books. What are the main causes that are driving this?
Yeah. So what we had was, let me go back and tell a few years of history. So we had COVID, and the COVID shock is basically, it's like when you unplug the Windows computer. We sort of unplug the global economy and you plug it back in, and it takes a long time to start back up again. And that's a specific form of a supply shock. I want to point out it happened in every country around the world in roughly equal measure. So as much as there's a lot of rhetoric around it being a Biden inflation, it really was a global reset as a result of the largest disruption to supply chains in yours or my lifetimes. Then that's a big blip, but that blip just falls out of the system, which is to say when prices go from low to high, that process is inflationary. When they stay high, that's not inflation. That's just high prices. That's an important distinction. People often are worried about high prices and they talk about inflation or the other way around. The president, as he was running for office, did something deeply irresponsible. He didn't promise to get inflation down. He promised to get prices down, which he's fundamentally failed to do. No prices falling. I mean, not none, but the average price level is overwhelmingly higher than when he arrived. There's nothing he's done to bring the price level down. In fact, the single best way to bring the price level down would be by starting a recession. So the promise was irresponsible. Fortunately, he didn't follow through on it. I don't know how often you can say that. That's COVID. So the COVID inflation disappeared, and basically we were on track for, as that disappeared, inflation to come back down to normal. And it got down to about 3% round about the election, and we were just waiting for the last mile. Just think of the movement from 3% to 2%. I want to point out both 2 and 3 are pretty low, as in it's not an overwhelming part of my life. If you remember when it was 9%, it felt angrifying, which is a word I just made up. We were on track for it to float back down. The president arrives, starts a trade war. And all of a sudden, when you tax other goods, turns out you make them more expensive. The president, by the way, has spent a year and a half denying that. And then this week said, I want to respond to the cost of living crisis. I'm worried how expensive beef is, so I'm going to cut tariffs on beef. Which, by the way, is the most profound, most direct acknowledgement that they all knew all along that they were raising prices. Of course they knew that. The whole point of tariffs is to raise prices. If you don't raise prices for foreign goods, you don't create extra demand for domestic goods. So that's been a big part. So that's been a big part of the story over the past year and a half. Now, I'm going to bore you even more. Sorry, Susan. I just get excited about this. there was a period through 2025 where I'd go on shows like this and people would say, well, inflation's not that high yet. And the reason for that is they instituted tariffs and then they immediately turned them off. If you remember Liberation Day, 7 days later, we got unliberated again. And then we went and did 0 out of 90 deals in 90 days. And then the president gave himself a bit more time. And then he had a nap and then he woke up and he redid the tariffs. And so actually the tariffs are moderately new. And so they've now been feeding inflation through late 25 and early 26. And those inflationary pressures were still there, but we're hoping they'd start to fade out. And then we decided if you were elected on a platform of bringing down prices on day one, the first thing you'd do is bomb a run, forcing up energy prices. Sorry, this is America, and I have to be clear when I'm being sarcastic. So you shouldn't bomb a run if you want to bring down energy prices. Let me get that clear.
Wish we had known that 10 weeks ago.
I blame sarcasm for the situation we're in.
So if you listen to the president, he tells you every day that the economy is great, gas prices are falling. If you look on the internet, you would think that we're in another Great Depression. Where are we really at with the economy?
Yeah, I hate giving letter grades because they mean different things to people from different generations. So when I was in college, getting a B was pretty good. There's been so much grade inflation. If my kids get a B, I don't talk to them. No, I do talk to them, but I send them to their room.
Mm.
But I think the economy's a B right now in a grade inflated world. So fortunately, unemployment had been rising for the first part of the Trump administration. It feels like it's leveled out. Inflation is well above the Fed's target, and we were in the middle of a supply shock and a war, as well as the middle of a trade war. The budget deficit, no one talks about this, but the budget deficit is at a level that would only make sense if we were in a profound recession. It's been an absolutely irresponsible cash splash, much of it to the rich. So I would want a better return on the fiscal dollars that we're spending right now. I think arguably, the B is a complicated letter grade here. If you asked how people were feeling, you'd go closer to B minus. If you looked at the hard statistics, you'd go closer to B plus. Part of it is, as you look forward, we feel more reasons to be a little bit anxious or a lot anxious than maybe we're seeing in the numbers so far. I think the other thing, though, is what's different. So when a global pandemic shut down the world economy,
Mhm.
I understood it was biology destroying the economy. The biggest economic shocks the United States is facing right now come from the White House. And so grading economic policy and grading the economy might be slightly different things. Grading the economy, maybe we're in B land. Grading economic policy, you've started a trade war that you appear to have gotten bored with halfway through and walked off, like literally just fallen asleep in front of the television. And then woke up with a start, bombed Iran, closed the Strait of Hormuz, which has bigger implications for the rest of the world than it does here, but still huge implications here. And once again, appears to have fallen asleep in front of the television.
I've noticed that that's a theme for you. You keep talking about the president falling asleep.
I don't think it's about my obsessions with sleep. It's about his obsessions with not following through. I don't think the statement's about me, mate. Look, let me just be clear with the audience about where we are with the trade war, because it's utterly bizarre. So he has Liberation Day, then he calls it off, then he puts it back on. Then we go through the next year, and by the way, everyone understands it's probably illegal. The Supreme Court knocks it down. The next day he says, well, I'm going to put in place a temporary 150-day tariff because he's using a different legal authority. This legal authority only allows a temporary tariff of up to 15%. The next day, he says 10%, just kidding, 15%.
Mm-hmm.
Never takes that back, but actually, so no one knows what the tariff rate is. And I'm not joking. The president literally announced 2 tariff rates.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out they've implemented 10%. That's what they'll charge you at the border, but you wouldn't know that by listening to the president. This is a temporary tariff for up to 150 days. that has also since been ruled unconstitutional. We don't know what the next tariff regime is. He hasn't said, you know what, I got it wrong. Maybe we should go to Congress. Let's sort out what the Constitution says, or
Right.
this is a bad idea, or this isn't working out. He's just tariffing
Yes.
in a temporary way, with no recognition that most of those 150 days are gone and it's already unconstitutional and none of us know. Like, as far as I can tell, literally got bored and walked off the soccer pitch. I've
Mhm.
seen under sixes play soccer with a stronger sense of focus and follow through. And then where are we in Iran? The strait is closed. The global economy is hurting. The Iranians have nukes. They have an Ayatollah Khomeini. If that's the best we can get, then get out with a sense of urgency.
Mhm. So the Supreme Court made it clear to the president that all he needs to do is go to Congress if he wants his tariff policy. He has a Republican Congress, but he has decided not to go that route, which would at least give us some clarity about what the rate is. Do you think that he will be doing this at any point, or are we still kind of bobbing and weaving along?
You make a really, really fundamentally important point, Susan. I just want to just double down on it, which is every time the court have ruled against the president, he's whined and he's hollered and he's cried and he's sooked and he said, this is terrible for America that I can't set tariffs. He can. He just needs Congress. So to be clear, the only thing the president's upset about is he can't unilaterally do it, which, by the way, is not a very Republican, republic being the opposite of a monarchy, way of thinking about the world. Those of us who are used to thinking in terms of democracies don't think it's that unusual to have to win over elected representatives to get a policy. So the president hasn't gone to Congress, I think, for basically two reasons. One, that would require doing some hard work.
Mm.
And two, the policies are dumb. They're so dumb that even a Republican Congress is not going to go along with them. So he would lose the war of ideas. And because of that, he doesn't fight it. He doesn't play it. And so we have unconstitutional tariff, 2 rounds of unconstitutional tariffs, and the president looking to use tariff powers in ways that may turn out to be constitutional, but certainly weren't the way the framers of the Constitution would have envisioned.